He approached to mock her desperate attempts to look rich with a rental car, but his smirk vanished when three identical boys ran to her calling Mommy, while her chauffeur handed her the keys to her fleet of luxury vehicles. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Zora Jenkins stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Trump Soho penthouse, watching as snow fell gently over Manhattan. The city lights twinkled below, a spectacle that would normally captivate her. Tonight, however, her attention was fixed on the small plastic stick she held between trembling fingers. 2 pink lines. Unmistakable. 3 months pregnant with Jamal Williams' child. She placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach. 6 months of marriage to the heir of one of Texas's largest oil fortunes, and now this unexpected blessing. Nervousness fluttered in her chest, but beneath it lay a deep, quiet joy. A baby. Their baby. The sound of the front door opening pulled her from her reverie. Jamal's confident footsteps echoed through the marble foyer, followed by the distinctive thud of his Italian leather briefcase hitting the glass coffee table. "Jamal, we need to talk," Zora said, turning from the window, her voice steadier than she felt. He didn't look up, focused on sorting through papers from his briefcase. "Not now, Zora. I have dinner with investors in 30 minutes. I'm pregnant," she blurted out, watching as the words froze his movements mid-motion. The silence that followed was deafening. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours as Jamal slowly straightened his posture. When he finally turned to face her, the warmth that had once filled his brown eyes had vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Are you sure it's mine?" he asked, his voice flat. The question hit Zora like a physical blow, forcing her back a step. "How can you even ask that?" Jamal released a dry laugh, loosening his Hermes tie as if the mere conversation was suffocating him. "Let's be realistic, Zora. We both know this marriage was a mistake." "A mistake?" Disbelief colored her voice. "You proposed to me less than a year ago." It was a moment of weakness, a phase. He unbuttoned his collar, avoiding her gaze. "Look at you and look at me. A black woman from Detroit with community college education will never be enough for the circles I need to move in now." The words cut deep, slicing through Zora's heart with surgical precision. She felt tears welling but fought to maintain her composure. "I thought you loved me for who I am. I had fun with you, Zora. It was exciting, different. But now that my father has put me on the company's board, I need someone who understands my world." Through the window behind her, Zora caught sight of a silver Bentley pulling up in front of their building. A woman with flowing red hair stepped out of the passenger side and stood waiting on the sidewalk, looking upward expectantly. "Who is she?" Zora asked, though she already knew the answer. "Anastasia, Russian model. Met her at a Vogue event last month." Jamal pulled a pre-packed suitcase from inside their walk-in closet. "She understands how this game works." "And our baby? Your child?" Jamal froze momentarily, then continued packing his personal items with clinical efficiency. "That baby is a mistake that would ruin my image. Do what you want with it, but don't come looking for me to pay your bills. You're already a burden I'm discarding." Zora staggered backward, feeling as if she'd been punched in the stomach. "You can't just abandon me like this. We're married." "My lawyers will contact you tomorrow with divorce papers." He snapped his suitcase shut. "As for the apartment, I have bad news. It's in the company's name. You have until tomorrow to leave." "Tomorrow?" Panic flooded Zora's voice. "Jamal, I have nowhere to go. I quit my job because you insisted. I sold my apartment. Not my problem." The suitcase clicked shut with finality. "Women like you never amount to anything, especially without a man like me. It was fun while it lasted, but let's be honest, you were a novelty, not a real partner." He gathered his belongings without another glance in her direction. "Don't try to contact me. It's over." Zora watched in stunned silence as he walked out the door, leaving nothing but the lingering scent of his expensive cologne. Minutes passed before she could move, before the reality of what had just happened fully registered. She was alone, pregnant, and as of tomorrow, homeless. She slid down against the wall until she hit the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees as the first sob escaped her lips. That freezing December night, Zora Jenkins found herself sitting on a hard bench at Penn Station, a single suitcase containing her remaining possessions at her feet, $43 in her wallet, a dead cell phone, and a growing sense of disbelief at how quickly her life had unraveled. The station bustled with late-night travelers, businessmen in expensive coats hurrying past her without a second glance. 6 hours ago, she had been Mrs. Williams, living in a penthouse. Now, she was just another invisible person seeking shelter from the bitter New York winter. She had called everyone she knew in the city, only to discover that her friends were really Jamal's friends. None would risk his displeasure by helping her. Her family in Detroit was barely making ends meet. They couldn't afford to help her, let alone welcome another mouth to feed. A security guard eyed her suspiciously as she shifted positions on the bench. "Station closes for cleaning at 2 a.m., ma'am." Zora nodded, trying to look like someone waiting for a train rather than someone with nowhere else to go. "I'm just waiting for the 3 a.m. to Philadelphia." The lie bought her time, but not solutions. Where would she go when the station closed? How would she care for the baby growing inside her? Jamal's cruel words echoed in her mind. "Women like you never amount to anything." The humiliation burned hotter than her fear. She had trusted him completely, given up her independence for his promises of forever. Now she understood how calculated it had all been. Her racial background had made her an exciting diversion until she became inconvenient to his social climbing. The following months blurred together in a desperate struggle for survival. Zora moved between temporary jobs, waitressing during the day, receptionist at night, delivery work on weekends. Her divorce was finalized with brutal efficiency, Jamal's legal team overwhelming her with paperwork until she accepted a paltry settlement of $10,000 in exchange for moving on and never contacting him again. As her belly began to show, jobs became harder to find. Employers would look at her growing stomach and suddenly remember they'd found someone more qualified. The $10,000 dwindled rapidly in a city where a tiny room cost more per month than her entire apartment had in Detroit. At a women's shelter where she sometimes slept when money was particularly tight, Zora met Teresa, a retired programmer with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. Teresa had noticed Zora reading business books during the rare moments she wasn't working or sleeping. "You've got intelligence in your eyes," Teresa told her one night, sitting beside her on a worn couch. "And anger. Anger can be fuel if you know how to channel it." Zora looked up from her book on entrepreneurship. "Right now, I'm just trying to survive." Teresa nodded. "Survival first. But I see something in you that's planning beyond survival. Don't let go of that." 6 months into her pregnancy, disaster struck. After working a double shift at the diner to cover the rent on the tiny room she'd managed to secure, Zora collapsed in the employee bathroom. Sharp pains tore through her abdomen as concerned co-workers called an ambulance. In a crowded public hospital, a tired doctor delivered the devastating news. She had lost the baby. Complications exacerbated by stress and exhaustion. As she lay alone in the recovery ward, staring at the ceiling, Zora felt completely hollow. No Jamal, no baby, no future she could see clearly. "Ms. Jenkins?" A nurse stood at her bedside. "There's someone here to see you." It was Teresa, carrying a plastic bag and a small bunch of daisies. "I heard what happened. I'm so sorry, child." The simple kindness broke through Zora's carefully constructed walls. She sobbed as Teresa held her hand, releasing months of pain, fear, and loss. When the tears finally subsided, Teresa opened the plastic bag and pulled out a used laptop. "Learn to code. It's the future, and it doesn't discriminate." Zora wiped her eyes. "I don't know the first thing about programming. I'll teach you the basics. After that, it's just practice and determination. Teresa placed the laptop on the hospital tray table. And determination is something you have in spades. During her physical recovery, Zora discovered that coding provided emotional healing too. The logical problems required complete focus, giving her mind respite from grief. She had a natural talent for algorithms and interface design, absorbing Teresa's lessons and then teaching herself more through online resources at the public library. 3 months after her loss, she landed her first freelance job, building a website for a local florist. The $200 she earned felt more significant than any paycheck she'd received before. It was the first money she'd made using her mind rather than her body's labor. 1 year to the day after Jamal had abandoned her, Zora sat at her makeshift desk in her tiny rented room. Teresa had brought over takeout to mark the occasion, though Zora hadn't told her its significance. "I have something to show you," Zora said, pulling out a notebook filled with diagrams and plans. "I'm designing an app that predicts consumer behavior patterns using behavioral psychology principles combined with data analysis." Teresa adjusted her glasses, studying the detailed notes. "This is sophisticated work, Zora, beyond beginner level." "I know." There was quiet confidence in Zora's voice that hadn't been there before. "I'm not just going to survive, Teresa. I'm going to build something so extraordinary that one day when he looks at me, he'll regret every word he said." Teresa raised an eyebrow. "Revenge?" "No," Zora replied, determination shining in her eyes. "Justice, and the best form of justice is success." As snow fell outside her window, just as it had done 1 year ago in a penthouse across town, Zora couldn't know that her plan sketched in a cheap notebook would one day transform into a billion-dollar empire that would make the Williams Petroleum fortune look like pocket change in comparison. The next morning, Zora woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the harsh fluorescent lights of Penn Station. Her neck ached from sleeping upright, and the thin jacket she'd worn provided little protection against the winter chill that permeated the terminal. A security guard was nudging her shoulder, his face a mixture of annoyance and reluctant compassion. "Can't sleep here, miss. Station's opening for the morning rush." Zora straightened, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. "Sorry, I was just waiting for my train," she lied, grabbing her suitcase. "Your train left hours ago or never existed," he replied skeptically, but then his voice softened. "There's a women's shelter on East 45th. They might have space." Mumbling thanks, Zora made her way to the restroom where she splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection. Dark circles framed her eyes, and her usually vibrant skin looked dull under the unflattering bathroom lights. 24 hours ago, she had been using Chanel skincare products in a marble bathroom. Now she was washing her face in a public restroom with harsh soap that left her skin feeling tight and stripped. Outside, Manhattan was awakening under a fresh blanket of snow. Business people hurried past, clutching coffee cups, their breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. Zora joined the stream of humanity, her pregnant body already feeling the strain of homelessness after just one night. The shelter on East 45th was full. So was the one on 39th. By midday, Zora had visited 4 different shelters, each turning her away with apologetic looks and suggestions to try somewhere else. Her feet ached inside boots not designed for extensive walking, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. "Eat something first," she whispered to her belly, using the last $5 in her wallet to buy a sandwich and a banana from a corner deli. By late afternoon, she had secured a spot at a women's shelter in Queens, a crowded facility with metal bunk beds and the pervasive smell of industrial disinfectant. As she placed her suitcase on the thin mattress assigned to her, Zora caught several women eyeing it speculatively. The designer luggage Jamal had bought her now felt less like a luxury and more like a target on her back. "First night?" asked an older woman with weathered skin, occupying the bunk beside hers. Zora nodded, unconsciously placing a protective hand over her stomach. "How far along?" the woman inquired, nodding at Zora's gesture. 3 months. Better hide anything valuable in that fancy case, the woman advised in a low voice, and sleep with your shoes under your pillow. That night, lying awake on the uncomfortable mattress, listening to the cacophony of snores, coughs, and muffled sobs around her, Zora felt the full weight of her new reality crash down. Pregnancy hormones amplified her emotions, and silent tears tracked down her temples into her hair. She curled around her still flat stomach, whispering promises to the tiny life inside her, promises she had no idea how she would keep. 2 weeks later, Zora sat across from Jamal's divorce attorney in an opulent midtown office. The contrast between them could not have been more stark. The lawyer in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than 3 months' rent in her former Detroit apartment. Zora in the only clean outfit she had left, a simple dress she'd bought at a thrift store the day before. "Mrs. Williams, my client is prepared to offer you a settlement of $10,000 on the condition that you sign these papers today and agree to never contact him again," the attorney stated, sliding a thick document across the polished mahogany table. Zora stared at the papers, nausea rising that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. $10,000? After he left me homeless and pregnant? The attorney's expression remained impassive. "My client disputes the paternity claim, and given your background, pursuing this matter would be lengthy and ultimately fruitless. $10,000 is quite generous considering the brevity of the marriage." Her background. The implication was clear. Who would believe a black woman from Detroit over the son of a prominent Texas oil family? The system wasn't designed for people like her to win against people like him. With trembling fingers, Zora took the pen. Each signature felt like betrayal to herself and her unborn child, but survival instinct overrode pride. $10,000 wouldn't last long in New York, but it was better than nothing. As she signed the final page, the attorney had the decency to look uncomfortable. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Jenkins," he said, reverting to her maiden name as the papers dictated, "I've handled many divorces, and this isn't typical." "You mean he usually waits until after the baby is born to abandon his wives?" Zora replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within. The attorney had no response to that. The $10,000 bought Zora a temporary reprieve. She found a tiny basement studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood in the Bronx, paid 3 months' rent in advance, and began the desperate search for employment. Her growing pregnancy made finding work increasingly difficult. Employers would look interested until they noticed her condition. Then suddenly positions would be filled or qualifications would change. "We need someone who can commit long-term," a cafe manager told her after glancing at her slightly rounded belly. "I understand commitment," Zora had replied. "I'm pregnant, not terminally ill." But the rejection email came that evening anyway. Finally, a small diner in Harlem hired her as a waitress, drawn by her determination and willingness to work the least desirable shifts. The work was physically demanding, hours on her feet, carrying heavy trays, smiling through exhaustion and morning sickness. Her tips were meager. Customers seemed to tip less generously to a pregnant server, as if her condition somehow affected her service quality. One particularly brutal day, after a 10-hour shift with barely any breaks, Zora counted her tips, $27. Her feet were swollen, her back throbbed, and her ankles had nearly disappeared into puffy flesh that strained against her shoes. As she trudged up the subway stairs, a glossy magazine cover at a newsstand caught her eye. Jamal and his new Russian model girlfriend at a charity gala, his arm possessively around her waist, both smiling brilliantly for the cameras. The headline read, "Oil, Air, and Supermodel Heat Up Manhattan's Social Scene." Something inside Zora hardened as she stared at the image. She thought of the baby growing inside her, who would never know its father, who might never have the opportunities that Jamal's wealth could have provided. With renewed determination, she continued her climb, ignoring the protest of her tired body. By her 5th month of pregnancy, Zora had established a grueling routine. waitressing during the day at the diner, working as a night receptionist at a budget hotel from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m., then sleeping for a few precious hours before starting all over again. On Sundays, her only day off from the diner and hotel, she delivered packages by bicycle for a local courier service, her growing belly making balance increasingly challenging. Each night, she would empty her tips and meager wages into a coffee can labeled Baby Fund, counting the accumulated dollars and coins with fierce pride. The money was nowhere near enough, but it represented her refusal to be defeated. "We're going to be okay," she would tell her stomach each night before falling into exhausted sleep. "Somehow, we'll be okay." It was at the women's shelter, where she still occasionally went for free meals when money was particularly tight, that Zora met Teresa. A sharp-eyed woman in her 60s with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a practical bun, Teresa volunteered at the shelter teaching basic computer skills. She noticed Zora sitting alone in a corner during dinner, absorbed in a worn library book about business startups. "That's some heavy reading for dinner time," Teresa commented, sitting down across from her. Zora looked up, startled. "It's the only time I have to read." Teresa glanced at the book's title, then at Zora's exhausted face and swollen belly. "You're interested in business?" "I'm interested in not being poor forever," Zora replied bluntly. "In building something that can't be taken away." Teresa studied her for a long moment. "You have intelligence in your eyes. And anger. Anger can be fuel if you know how to channel it." For the first time in months, Zora felt seen. Not as a charity case, not as a body to perform labor, but as a person with potential. The recognition brought unexpected tears to her eyes, which she quickly blinked away. "I don't know how to channel anything right now except surviving until tomorrow," she admitted. Teresa smiled, a knowing expression that suggested she'd been there herself. "Survival comes first, the rest follows." One particularly harsh evening, after being stiffed on tips by a large party that had kept her running for hours, Zora broke down in the diner's back alley. Leaning against the brick wall, she sobbed, for the baby she couldn't properly provide for the dreams she'd had to defer, for the humiliation of being discarded like garbage by a man who had promised to love her forever. "He said I would never be anything," she whispered to the indifferent New York sky. "That women like me never amount to anything without men like him." The words had embedded themselves in her psyche, appearing in her dreams, echoing in moments of weakness. Who was she to think she could overcome what Jamal had done? The system was designed for people like him to win and people like her to fade into obscurity. That night, returning to her basement apartment, Zora found Teresa waiting outside her building, holding a paper bag. "You missed computer class," the older woman said by way of greeting. "Brought you some leftovers from the shelter dinner." Zora accepted the bag gratefully. "Thank you, I had to work late." Teresa's shrewd eyes took in Zora's tear-stained face. "Men like him build fortunes on sand," she said unexpectedly. "Women like you build legacies in stone." Zora blinked in surprise. "How did you know I was thinking about him?" "Because I've been where you are, different circumstances, same story." Teresa handed Zora a business card with a phone number scribbled on the back. "When you're ready to build something, call me. I know people who might help." As her 6th month of pregnancy progressed, Zora began experiencing troubling symptoms: dizziness, spotting, sharp pains that would come and go. The free clinic doctor looked concerned during her checkup, recommending bed rest and reduced stress, luxuries as unattainable to Zora as Jamal's penthouse. "I can't stop working," she explained to the sympathetic but powerless doctor. "There's no one else to pay my rent." She ignored the warning signs, pushing through longer shifts to compensate for the tips she was losing as her pregnancy became more pronounced. Customers seemed uncomfortable with her visible condition, some requesting different servers, others leaving smaller tips with disapproving glances. One night, counting coins to decide between buying prenatal vitamins or enough food for the week, Zora made the choice that countless poor mothers before her had made. She prioritized her baby's nutrition over her own, eating just enough to function while spending the remainder on vitamins and as nutritious food as her budget allowed. The growing stomach and swollen feet were constant reminders of what Jamal had done. But Zora didn't know that the worst tragedy was yet to come, one that would transform her pain into fuel for an unprecedented rise. Teresa's words about channeling anger into fuel echoed in Zora's mind throughout the following days. The older woman had seen something in her that Zora herself had almost forgotten existed, potential beyond mere survival. But potential meant nothing when each day was a struggle to simply exist. The 6th month of her pregnancy brought new challenges. Her body, already taxed by the grueling work schedule, began to protest more vigorously. The morning sickness she thought she'd left behind in the first trimester returned with a vengeance, accompanied by swelling in her feet and ankles that made each step painful. Still, she pushed on, taking double shifts at the diner whenever possible, answering phones at the hotel until her eyes burned from exhaustion. "You're working too hard," Jorge, the cook at the diner, commented one afternoon as Zora leaned against the kitchen wall, catching her breath between tables. "My sister lost her baby working like you do." Zora straightened, adjusting her apron over her prominent belly. "I don't have a choice, Jorge. No work means no rent, and no rent means the street." He shook his head but said nothing more, sliding her order across the pass with an extra side of fries she hadn't ordered. "For the baby," he muttered, turning back to the grill. The small kindnesses, Jorge's extra fries, a regular customer's unusually generous tip, Teresa's occasional bag of groceries, were what kept Zora going on the darkest days. Days when she'd spot Jamal and Anastasia in a glossy magazine at the newsstand, or when the divorce papers arrived with his attorney's business card paperclipped to the front, as if to remind her how far she'd fallen. It happened on a Tuesday. Zora had worked the breakfast and lunch shifts at the diner, then gone straight to the hotel, where a convention had filled every room and the phone rang incessantly. By midnight, her back was in agony, and strange pains were radiating across her abdomen. But she couldn't afford to leave early. She needed every hour, every dollar. At 2 a.m, her shift finally over, Zora stepped out into the biting February cold. The subway platform was nearly empty at this hour. As she waited for the train, a particularly sharp pain doubled her over, forcing her to grab the bench for support. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. "Miss, are you okay?" An elderly woman approached, concern etched on her face. Zora tried to straighten, to assure the woman she was fine, but the words died on her lips as a warm wetness trickled down her legs. Looking down in horror, she saw blood spreading across her uniform pants. "Help!" she whispered before the world tilted sideways. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and urgent voices. Through waves of pain and fear, Zora clutched her belly, whispering desperate pleas. "Please, please, save my baby! Please, God, not my baby!" The emergency room was chaotic. A car accident had brought in multiple victims, and the staff moved with the frantic efficiency of people stretched too thin. Zora was wheeled into an examination room where a young doctor with exhausted eyes quickly assessed her condition. "How far along are you?" he asked, his hands gentle but his movements efficient. 6 months, Zora managed through gritted teeth. "Something's wrong. Please help my baby." The next hours were a nightmare of medical terms, worried faces, and pain that eclipsed anything Zora had ever experienced. She was vaguely aware of being moved to another room, of an ultrasound machine being wheeled in, of the sudden silence that fell when the technician pressed the wand to her belly. "I'm sorry," the doctor said finally, his voice heavy with the weight of words he'd spoken too many times before. "We can't detect a heartbeat. The placenta has detached." Zora stared at him uncomprehendingly. "What does that mean?" His eyes filled with compassion. "It means we need to perform an emergency procedure to protect your health." I'm so sorry, Ms. Jenkins. We couldn't save your baby." The words hit her with physical force, driving the air from her lungs. "No," she whispered. "No, check again. Please check again." But the gentle hand on her shoulder told her what she already knew to be true. Her baby, the tiny life she had talked to, planned for, sacrificed for, was gone. The procedure that followed was merciful only in that Zora remembered little of it. She woke hours later in a recovery room, her body hollow in more ways than one. A nurse with kind eyes adjusted her IV, checking her vitals with efficient movements. "Is there someone we can call for you, honey?" she asked gently. "Family? The baby's father?" Zora turned her face to the wall, tears sliding silently into her hair. "There's no one." The stark truth of those 3 words settled over the room like a shroud. In a city of 8 million people, Zora Jenkins had no one to hold her hand through the worst day of her life. No shoulder to cry on, no arms to shelter her from the storm of grief. Later that evening, as Zora stared numbly at the ceiling tiles, counting them for the 14th time, a soft knock came at her door. Teresa stood in the doorway, clutching a small bunch of yellow daisies and a plastic bag. "The shelter called me," she explained, moving to Zora's bedside. "I'm listed as your emergency contact." The sight of a familiar face broke the fragile dam holding back Zora's emotions. Sobs tore from her throat, raw and primal, as Teresa gently gathered her into a maternal embrace. "I lost the baby," Zora cried, the words making the loss horrifyingly real. "I tried so hard. I did everything I could." "I know, child. I know." Teresa's voice was thick with empathy. "It's not your fault. You hear me? This is not your fault." But in her heart, Zora couldn't help but wonder if it was. If she hadn't been working so many hours, if she had been able to rest properly, eat properly, if Jamal hadn't abandoned her, forcing her into this desperate existence, would her baby still be alive? The grief was all-consuming, a black hole that threatened to devour every spark of light in Zora's soul. For 3 days, she lay in the hospital bed, barely speaking, barely eating, her body recovering while her spirit remained shattered. On the 4th day, Teresa arrived with a determined look in her eyes and the same plastic bag she'd brought earlier. "Enough wallowing," she announced, placing the bag on Zora's lap. "Time to build something new from the ashes." Zora looked down at the bag without interest. "What is this?" "A lifeline." Teresa opened the bag and pulled out a battered laptop. "It's old, but it works. I've loaded it with programming tutorials and some basic software." Zora stared at the computer, then at Teresa, confusion evident in her swollen eyes. "I don't understand." "Learn to code. It's the future, and it doesn't discriminate." Teresa placed the laptop on the hospital tray table and opened it. "It doesn't care where you're from, what you look like, or what's happened to you. Code only cares if it works." The concept was so far removed from Zora's current reality that she almost laughed. "I'm grieving my child, and you want me to learn computer programming?" Teresa's gaze softened, but her voice remained firm. "Grief will be with you a long time, child. You can let it destroy you, or you can channel it into something that will ensure you never end up in this situation again." Something in Teresa's words penetrated the fog of Zora's despair. The thought of having control, of building something from nothing, of creating a future where she wouldn't be at the mercy of others' charity or cruelty. It sparked a tiny flame in the darkness. "I don't know the first thing about computers beyond the basics," she admitted. "That's why I'm here." Teresa pulled up a chair. "I spent 30 years as a programmer before I retired. I'll teach you." And so, in the sterile hospital room, with the ghost of her lost child hovering at the edges of her consciousness, Zora began to learn the language that would eventually transform her life. The weeks that followed were a slow crawl back to the world of the living. Zora's body healed faster than her heart, but the coding lessons provided a much-needed distraction from the crushing grief. When she was discharged from the hospital, Teresa helped her move to an even smaller but cheaper room, allowing her savings to stretch while she recovered. Physical work was out of the question for at least a month, the doctor had insisted. Instead, Zora poured herself into learning to code, often staying up until the early hours of the morning, her face illuminated by the blue glow of the laptop screen. HTML, CSS, JavaScript. The languages were logical, orderly, a stark contrast to the chaos of her emotions. "You have a natural aptitude for this," Teresa remarked one evening reviewing Zora's practice website. "You visualize structure intuitively." Zora nodded absently, already thinking about how to fix a bug in her code. For the first time since the loss, she had found something that fully engaged her mind, temporarily muting the soundtrack of grief and self-recrimination that usually played in her head. The coding became therapy, a way to process her pain through the creation of something new. When memories of the hospital threatened to overwhelm her, she would dive deeper into a challenging problem. When she woke crying from dreams of holding a baby she would never meet, she would open the laptop and build digital architectures until dawn. 3 months after losing her baby, Zora created her first professional website, a simple but elegant online presence for a local florist who had supplied the hospital with fresh arrangements. The owner, an elderly woman named Rose, had been touched by Zora's story and offered her first real opportunity. "I don't have much to pay you," Rose had said apologetically. "My granddaughter says I need a website, but those big companies charge thousands." $200, Zora had replied, surprising herself with her confidence. "And I'll include a month of updates and teaching you how to maintain it." The day Rose handed her a check for $200, made out to Zora Jenkins, web designer, was the first time Zora felt a sense of professional pride since before her marriage to Jamal. This money wasn't earned by carrying trays or answering phones. It was earned by creating something of value using her intellect and newly acquired skills. Exactly 1 year after Jamal had told her she was a burden he was discarding, Zora sat at her small desk, surrounded by coding books borrowed from the library. The coffee can that had once held her baby fund now read Future Fund and contained just over $1,000, savings from her web design work, which had grown to include 3 more local businesses. Teresa arrived with takeout Chinese food, a small celebration of how far Zora had come in a year of almost unimaginable hardship. "I have something to show you," Zora said, pulling out a notebook filled with diagrams and flowcharts. "I'm designing an app that analyzes consumer behavior patterns using psychological principles combined with purchasing data." Teresa adjusted her glasses, examining the detailed sketches with growing amazement. "This is sophisticated work, Zora, way beyond beginner level." "I know." There was quiet confidence in Zora's voice that had been absent for a long time. "I've been researching at the business library. There's nothing exactly like this on the market." Zora flipped to a page titled ZW Ventures 5-Year Plan in bold letters. "I'm not just going to survive, Teresa. I'm going to build something so extraordinary that one day when he looks at me, he'll regret every word he said." Teresa raised an eyebrow, studying Zora's determined expression. "Revenge?" "No," Zora replied, a glint of steel in her eyes. "Justice. And the best form of justice is success." While the clock marked exactly 1 year since Jamal had called her a burden, Zora didn't know that her plan written in that cheap notebook would one day transform into a technological empire that would make the Williams Petroleum Empire look like a relic of the past. Justice, Zora realized, would be a long road. But with her plan now committed to paper, the first step toward her future was clear. She carefully closed the notebook containing her ZW Ventures 5-year plan and looked up at Teresa, who was still studying her with a mixture of pride and concern. "You have the talent," Teresa said, gathering the empty takeout containers. "But talent isn't enough in this industry. You'll need connections, credibility, and capital." 3 things that are systematically denied to people who look like us. Zora nodded, undeterred. Then I'll build them from scratch. 1 line of code, 1 client, $1 at a time. Over the next 3 years, Zora's life settled into a relentless rhythm. Her tiny room in the Bronx became a miniature tech hub, its walls gradually disappearing behind post-it notes covered with algorithms and user interface sketches. The old futon where she slept occupied one corner, while the remainder of the space was devoted to her work. A second-hand desk supporting 2 monitors Teresa had salvaged from a corporate upgrade, reference books stacked in precarious towers, and whiteboards propped against any available surface. Every morning, Zora woke at 5:30, coding for 2 hours before taking on client work. Afternoons were spent at the public library, using their internet connection to research market trends and teach herself advanced programming concepts. Evenings found her back at her desk, working on her app prototype until her eyes burned and the numbers blurred together. "When was the last time you left this room for something other than work?" Teresa asked one Sunday afternoon, frowning at Zora's pallor and the empty ramen cups piled in the trash. Zora didn't look up from her screen. "I went to that tech meetup on Thursday." "That was also work," Teresa pointed out. "You need sunlight, human interaction that doesn't involve discussing APIs." "I'll socialize when I've built something that can't be taken away from me," Zora replied, the ghost of her past losses hovering unspoken between them. Her wardrobe consisted of exactly 3 professional outfits, purchased from consignment stores and maintained with obsessive care. Every penny she earned from freelance web development and small coding projects went toward 3 things: bare minimum living expenses, her growing collection of technical equipment, and a savings account she called her seed fund for the business she was determined to launch. 6 months into this austere existence, Zora experienced her first significant rejection. A potential client, a mid-sized law firm needing a custom case management system, had seemed enthusiastic about her proposal. She had spent weeks developing a detailed prototype, working through nights to perfect it. The meeting began promisingly. Dressed in her best consignment store blazer, Zora waited in the conference room with her young male assistant, a computer science student named Miguel, whom she'd hired specifically for this presentation. "Mr. Harrington will be with you shortly," the receptionist informed them, her eyes sliding past Zora to address Miguel directly. When the firm's partners entered, they repeated the pattern, extending hands to Miguel first, assuming he was the lead developer. Throughout the presentation, they directed technical questions to him, despite Zora being the one who answered. "Your assistant certainly knows her stuff," one partner commented to Miguel afterward. Miguel, to his credit, looked uncomfortable. "Actually, Ms. Jenkins is the lead developer. I'm her assistant." The room fell awkwardly silent. Zora maintained her professional smile, though her stomach clenched with familiar disappointment. "Well," Mr. Harrington said finally, not quite meeting her eyes, "we'll be in touch." The rejection email came the next day, citing alignment with another vendor whose approach better fits our company culture. That night, Zora sat on her futon, exhaustion and frustration threatening to overwhelm her. On her laptop screen, a gossip site displayed Jamal at a charity gala, his arm around a blonde socialite who was not Anastasia. The caption identified her as his second wife. 2 divorces in 3 years, Zora murmured, studying the image. Despite his smiling facade, Jamal looked strained, his eyes lacking the confident gleam she remembered. The article mentioned troubles at Williams Petroleum and pressure from the board in passing. She closed the browser, returning to her code. Whatever satisfaction she might have felt at his apparent difficulties was overshadowed by her own precarious position. She was still one major illness or missed opportunity away from financial disaster. "Women like you never amount to anything," his voice echoed in her memory. "Watch me," she whispered to the empty room, fingers attacking the keyboard with renewed determination. The turning point came unexpectedly. After staying awake for 48 hours straight to complete a challenging project, Zora collapsed from exhaustion. Teresa found her unconscious on the floor when she came to deliver groceries. "This stops now," Teresa declared after Zora regained consciousness. "You're killing yourself, and for what? To prove something to a man who doesn't even know you exist anymore?" The harsh words penetrated Zora's single-minded focus. For the first time in months, she truly looked at herself, thin to the point of gauntness, dark circles, permanent fixtures under her eyes, her entire existence narrowed to work and revenge. "I need to succeed," she whispered. "You will," Teresa said, her voice gentling, "but not like this. Success built on self-destruction isn't success. It's just a different kind of failure." That intervention marked a subtle but crucial shift in Zora's approach. She began allowing herself one day off each week. She joined a community coding group, both to network and to experience human interaction. Slowly, she built connections in New York's burgeoning tech scene, not the high-flying venture capitalists, but the ground-level innovators, the overlooked talents, the ones with fire and determination like her own. On her 26th birthday, Zora attended a local tech competition, entering her behavior analysis app prototype. The judges, a diverse panel of industry veterans, watched her demonstration with increasing interest. "The algorithm predicts consumer choices based not just on past behavior," Zora explained, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "but on psychological principles of decision-making under various emotional states." A ripple of impressed murmurs spread through the audience. When she was announced as the winner, the prize, $5,000 and mentorship from a respected developer, felt like validation of the path she'd chosen. One of the judges, Michael Chen, approached her afterward. "That was impressive work. How long have you been developing this concept?" 3 years, Zora replied, working nights and weekends around client projects. Michael nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to hear more. Are you seeking investment?" That conversation led to a meeting, which led to a series of increasingly serious discussions about funding. Michael, an angel investor who had made his fortune in early e-commerce, saw potential in Zora's approach that larger firms had missed. "Most behavior prediction tools look backward," he explained during their third meeting. "Yours looks forward. That's the difference between following trends and creating them." Yet even with Michael's interest, the path wasn't smooth. At a pitch meeting he arranged with fellow investors, Zora faced the familiar prejudices. "Have you considered bringing on a CEO?" one investor suggested, not quite meeting her eyes. "Someone with, more conventional experience to be the face of the company?" "You mean a white man?" Zora asked directly, years of struggle having eroded her patience for coded language. The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by Michael's laugh. "She's right, you know, and she's twice as qualified as half the founders you funded last quarter, Thomas." 2 weeks later, Michael presented his offer. $250,000 for 15% of a company that existed only as a prototype and business plan. The terms were fair, the valuation realistic, but respectful. "Why?" Zora asked him directly. "Why invest in me when so many others wouldn't?" Michael considered her question seriously. "Because you solved a problem no one else is addressing, using an approach no one else thought of. That's what great founders do." He paused. "And because you've already proven you'll succeed regardless of obstacles. That's a quality I can't teach and money can't buy." On a crisp autumn morning, Zora signed the incorporation papers for ZW Tech, deliberately maintaining the initials from her married name as a constant reminder of what she was working to overcome. The Williams name that had once been weaponized against her would become part of her armor. Her first official act as CEO was hiring Sarah, a brilliant programmer whose resume had languished in rejection piles because she was a single mother with a special needs child, requiring flexible working hours. "I can't guarantee we'll succeed," Zora told her candidly, "but I can promise your family circumstances will never be held against you here." Teresa attended the modest office warming party in Zora's new workspace, a small but professional suite in a converted factory building in Brooklyn. They toasted with sparkling cider in plastic cups, surrounded by second-hand furniture and brand-new computers. "To ZW Tech," Teresa said, raising her cup, "and to proving him wrong." Zora shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "Not to proving him wrong. To building something so significant that his opinion becomes irrelevant." That night, alone in the quiet office after everyone had left, Zora opened her laptop and began typing an email to a contact at a small business journal. The subject line read, "ZW Tech Launch, Pioneering Predictive Consumer Behavior Technology." As she crafted the press release announcing her company to the world, Zora couldn't help but think about how far she'd come. From homeless and pregnant in Penn Station to CEO of her own startup, the journey had cost her dearly. But standing at the threshold of this new beginning, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. While savoring that cheap, sparkling cider, Zora couldn't possibly imagine that in just 5 years her small startup in Brooklyn would be valued at $50 million, attracting the attention of the financial world that had once considered her invisible. While savoring the cheap, sparkling cider, Zora couldn't help but reflect on how quickly circumstances could change. One moment, she was homeless in Penn Station. Now, she was CEO of her own startup. Though the pain of her losses remained, it had hardened into something useful, a core of determination that fueled every decision, every late night, every pitch meeting. 2 years passed in a blur of activity. ZW Tech grew from Zora and Sarah to a team of 15, each selected not just for their technical skills, but for qualities Zora valued more: resilience, creativity, and the hunger that came from being previously overlooked. They occupied the entire floor of the Brooklyn building now, the original small suite having expanded as neighboring tenants moved out. The space reflected Zora's practical sensibilities, functional but not flashy, with money invested in cutting-edge equipment rather than status symbols. "We need more server capacity," Javier, her lead engineer, reported one Monday morning. "The behavior prediction model is handling more data than we anticipated." Zora nodded, making a note. "I have a meeting with Michael this afternoon. We'll discuss expanding our next funding round." While ZW Tech was still burning through the initial investment, their progress had exceeded projections. The app's beta version was being tested by several small online retailers with promising early results. But Zora knew they needed a major client, a recognized name that would validate their technology to the broader market. The opportunity came through Teresa's unexpected connection. Her former colleague's daughter worked in digital marketing for North Star, a mid-sized retail chain struggling to compete with online giants. "They're desperate for an edge," Teresa told Zora over their weekly dinner. "Traditional analytics aren't helping them predict inventory needs accurately." The meeting with North Star's executive team was scheduled for the following week. Zora prepared meticulously, running through the presentation countless times with her team, anticipating every possible question or objection. The day of the meeting, she stood before her bathroom mirror, studying her reflection. At 28, her face showed the journey of the past 5 years, a certain hardness around the eyes, a determination in the set of her jaw that hadn't been there before. She wore a navy suit purchased with her first CEO salary, not designer, but tailored and professional. "You've got this," she told her reflection, words she'd repeated through countless moments of doubt. The North Star headquarters occupied several floors of a Manhattan office building. As the elevator climbed, Zora felt the familiar flutter of anxiety she still experienced before major presentations. But unlike the early days, when that feeling had threatened to overwhelm her, she now recognized it as energy she could channel. The boardroom held 8 executives, predominantly white men in their 50s, looking skeptically at the presentation materials Zora's team had distributed. "Ms. Jenkins," began the CEO, Gerald Morrison, "I'll be direct. We've seen dozens of analytics solutions promising to revolutionize our business. What makes yours different?" Zora smiled, having anticipated this opening. Most analytics tell you what happened yesterday. We tell you what will happen tomorrow. She nodded to Javier, who initiated the demonstration on the large screen. Your current system analyzes past purchases to predict future behavior. Our system incorporates psychological principles of decision-making to anticipate shifts before they occur. For the next hour, she walked them through the technology, explaining in accessible terms how their algorithm identified patterns invisible to traditional analytics. The executive's skepticism gradually transformed into cautious interest. "This looks promising on paper," said Morrison, "but we'd need to see real results before committing." "I propose a 90-day trial," Zora countered. "We'll integrate with your current system for your Northeast stores only. Compare the performance metrics, and if we don't deliver at least 20% improvement in inventory efficiency, you pay nothing." A murmur ran through the executives. It was a bold guarantee. 15% would be significant, the CFO noted. "We'll deliver 20, Zora stated with quiet confidence. "Because we're not just measuring what people bought, we're understanding why they bought it." 3 days later, the contract was signed. For the next 3 months, Zora practically lived at the office, sleeping on a cot she installed in her private room. The North Star integration was the company's make-or-break moment, and she was determined that nothing would go wrong. The implementation required customizing their algorithm to North Star's specific customer base and inventory. Zora worked alongside her team, coding through nights, ordering midnight pizzas, and troubleshooting problems in real time. "You need to sleep," Sarah told her after finding Zora at her desk at 4 in the morning for the 3rd consecutive night. "I'll sleep when we succeed," Zora replied, not looking up from her screen. When the 90-day trial concluded, the results exceeded even Zora's optimistic projections. North Star's Northeast stores showed a 32% improvement in inventory efficiency and a 28% increase in sales. The system had accurately predicted a sudden surge in demand for home fitness equipment 2 weeks before competitors noticed the trend, allowing North Star to stock accordingly and capture market share. The email from Morrison arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. "What you did is magic. When can you implement company-wide?" That evening, Zora took her team out to celebrate, not to a fancy restaurant but to the small diner where she had once worked as a waitress. The owner recognized her and insisted on serving them personally. "Look at you now," he said proudly, as if her success somehow reflected on him. "Always knew you were meant for bigger things." Zora smiled politely, saying nothing about the times he'd denied her breaks when her pregnant feet were swollen beyond recognition. Some victories were best savored silently. The North Star success opened doors previously closed to ZW Tech. Zora was invited to speak on a technology panel at a regional conference, her first public appearance as a tech founder. Teresa helped her prepare, coaching her through the anxiety that still surfaced when she thought about being judged. "Remember," Teresa said as they rehearsed in Zora's modest Brooklyn apartment, "you've earned your place on that stage. Your technology works. That's what matters." The panel discussion focused on emerging trends in consumer analytics. Initially nervous, Zora found her voice when another panelist, a venture capitalist with minimal technical knowledge, made a dismissive comment about simple pattern recognition. "There's nothing simple about it," Zora interjected, her quiet voice somehow cutting through the conversation. She proceeded to explain the complex interplay of behavioral psychology and data science that informed her company's approach, speaking with such clarity and authority that the audience was visibly captivated. Afterward, business cards were pressed into her hands, and LinkedIn requests flooded her account. But the most significant outcome was an email from the editor of Fast Company requesting an interview for a feature on emerging technologies. The article, published 3 months later, bore the headline, "The Invisible Queen of Behavioral Analysis," above a professional photograph of Zora standing before a wall of code, arms crossed, expression confident but approachable. The piece detailed her innovative approach to consumer prediction, and hinted at her remarkable personal journey without specific details which Zora had declined to provide. "Some stories aren't ready to be told," she had told the persistent reporter. The morning the magazine hit newsstands, Zora bought a copy at the corner store near her apartment. Seeing her face on the cover felt surreal, a validation she had scarcely allowed herself to imagine during those dark days in Penn Station. Her phone rang as she was studying the article. It was Michael. "Have you seen the offers yet?" he asked without preamble. "What offers?" "Check your email. 3 acquisition inquiries already, and the West Coast isn't even awake yet." The offers continued throughout the day. By evening, 7 different companies had expressed interest in acquiring ZW Tech, with preliminary valuations ranging from $20 to $40 million. Zora sat in her apartment that night, the magazine open on her coffee table, her laptop displaying the most serious offer, $45 million from a major tech conglomerate, contingent on due diligence. For the first time since founding the company, she allowed herself to imagine an exit. With that money, she could be financially secure for life. She could buy a proper home, invest, perhaps even start another venture under less desperate circumstances. Yet something held her back. The company was just beginning to realize its potential. The North Star implementation had proven their technology worked at scale, but Zora knew they had barely scratched the surface of possible applications. The following week brought a new development. While getting coffee at a small cafe near her office, a man approached her table. "Ms. Jenkins, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to say your work on predictive analytics is revolutionary. I'm James Harlow from Sentinel Tech." It was the first time Zora had been recognized in public. The sensation was strange but not unpleasant. "Thank you," she replied, gesturing for him to join her. What followed was an informal but detailed discussion of behavioral analytics that eventually led to Sentinel becoming ZW Tech's second major client. By the time Zora turned 30, ZW Tech employed 37 people and had moved to larger offices in Brooklyn's tech corridor. The company was profitable, with a valuation approaching $50 million. Zora herself had finally moved from her tiny Brooklyn apartment to a modest but comfortable 2-bedroom in Chelsea, though she still lived far below her means, investing most of her salary back into the company. It was there, in her new living room with its view of the city skyline, that Zora received the call that would change everything again. "Ms. Jenkins, I'm calling from Vertex Global," said the crisp voice on the line. "Our CEO would like to discuss acquiring ZW Tech. We're prepared to offer $50 million, with you remaining as division head for at least 3 years post-acquisition." The offer was comprehensive, not just financial security, but continued control over her technology and team. After a week of intense negotiation, legal review, and soul-searching, Zora agreed to the acquisition with specific conditions: complete autonomy for her division, guaranteed funding for research, and, most importantly, freedom to pursue her next venture without restriction. The day she signed the acquisition papers, Zora's hand trembled slightly. Memories of another life-changing signature, her divorce papers, flashing unexpectedly. But this time, she was signing from a position of power, not desperation. "Congratulations," said the Vertex CEO as flashbulbs popped, capturing the moment for the business press. "You've built something remarkable." Later that evening, alone in her apartment, Zora allowed herself a moment of pure, unadulterated pride. Opening her laptop, she navigated to a private folder containing images she rarely viewed: screenshots of gossip articles about Jamal, clippings about Williams Petroleum's struggles, a saved copy of her divorce papers. She had kept them as fuel during the darkest times, reminders of what she was fighting to overcome. Now she moved them all to the trash, then emptied it. She no longer needed external motivation. The $50 million acquisition was validation enough. Opening a new browser tab, she typed "Fertility Specialists New York," beginning research for the next chapter of her life, one where she would build a family on her own terms, with the financial security to provide everything she hadn't been able to give the baby she'd lost. When the $50 million were deposited in her account, Zora didn't celebrate with extravagances. Instead, she made a discreet visit to an elite fertility clinic, determined to create the family that Jamal had destroyed, but this time, on her own terms. The fertility clinic receptionist smiled warmly as Zora entered the pristine waiting room. "Ms. Jenkins, Dr. Patel will see you now." Zora followed the woman down a hallway decorated with tasteful abstract art, her heart beating a rapid rhythm against her ribs. After selling ZW Tech, this appointment had been her first priority, not shopping for luxury items or celebrating with extravagant parties like her former husband might have done. Instead, she was pursuing something far more precious than material wealth. Dr. Patel, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an air of quiet competence, greeted Zora with a firm handshake. "I've reviewed your medical history. You mentioned a previous pregnancy loss at 6 months?" Zora nodded, the familiar ache resurfacing briefly. "Yes, 4 years ago. I was under significant stress at the time." "I'm sorry for your loss," Dr. Patel replied, her voice genuine. "But physically, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to carry a healthy pregnancy now. Your circumstances have changed considerably, I understand?" "Yes," Zora confirmed. "My company was recently acquired. I'm financially stable, with flexible working arrangements." "And the father?" Dr. Patel asked, glancing down at the intake form where Zora had left that section blank. Zora met her gaze steadily. "There won't be one. I'm choosing to do this on my own." A flicker of surprise crossed the doctor's face before she nodded professionally. "I see. We'll need to discuss sperm donor selection then." "Will that be a problem?" Zora asked, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. Dr. Patel smiled reassuringly. "Not at all. Many women choose this path now. I simply need to understand your situation to provide appropriate care." Relief washed over Zora. She had braced herself for judgment, for the same skeptical looks she'd encountered in the business world when she deviated from expected norms. As they discussed the process of in vitro fertilization, Zora felt a growing sense of reclamation. This pregnancy would be entirely on her terms, planned, wanted, and protected by the success she'd built from nothing. 2 months later, Zora stood in an empty floor of a Flatiron District building, surveying the space that would become the headquarters of ZW Ventures, her vision beyond the constraints of the acquisition deal. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air. "I want to remove these interior walls," she told the contractor, gesturing to the partitioned offices. "More light, more openness. I want people to see each other, to collaborate naturally." "That'll add to the budget," the contractor noted, making calculations on his tablet. "It's worth it," Zora replied without hesitation. 4 years ago, she'd been counting pennies for prenatal vitamins. Now, creating an optimal work environment for her future team was well within her means. While supervising the office renovation, Zora continued her fertility treatments. Each morning, she administered hormone injections with the same methodical precision she'd once applied to coding through the night. The process was physically uncomfortable and emotionally taxing, but Zora approached it with the determination that had become her hallmark. Teresa, who had remained her closest confidant, accompanied her to the egg retrieval procedure. "You're sure about doing this alone?" she asked as they waited in pre-op. "More sure than I've been about anything," Zora replied, adjusting the thin hospital gown. "I've built a business empire from nothing. I can certainly raise a child on my own." What she didn't say was how the memory of Jamal's betrayal still informed her decisions. She would never again put herself in a position where someone else could destroy what mattered to her most. 2 weeks after the egg retrieval, Dr. Patel called with the results. "We've successfully fertilized 7 eggs. They're developing well." Zora closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself to feel the first flutter of hope. "When can we proceed with implantation?" I'd recommend waiting one more cycle to let your body recover from the hormone treatments, Dr. Patel advised. In the meantime, we'll monitor the embryo's development. That evening, Zora walked through her newly renovated office space, now furnished with ergonomic workstations and state-of-the-art technology. She'd been methodically recruiting a team of brilliant minds, many of whom had been overlooked by larger tech companies due to unconventional backgrounds or family circumstances. Ms. Williams, her new assistant Morgan, approached with a stack of resumes. These are the final candidates for the AI development team. Zora had legally reclaimed the Williams surname after the acquisition, a decision that had surprised Teresa. Why keep his name? Her mentor had asked. Because every time someone calls me Williams, I'm reminded of what I overcame, Zora had explained. And because someday when people hear Williams, I want them to think of my company, not his. As Zora reviewed the candidates, she noticed a pattern in those she'd shortlisted. Nearly all were women, many with advanced degrees but employment gaps or lateral career moves that had likely caused other companies to pass them over. We should reach out to Dr. Chen immediately, she told Morgan. Her research on predictive algorithms is exactly what we need, even if she's been out of the industry for 3 years raising her child. 1 month later, on a crisp autumn morning, Zora sat in Dr. Patel's office receiving the most surprising news of her life. 3 embryos have successfully implanted, Dr. Patel explained, pointing to the ultrasound screen where 3 distinct sacs were visible. You're carrying triplets. Zora stared at the screen, momentarily speechless. Triplets? Are you certain? Quite certain, Dr. Patel confirmed. I should mention that multiple pregnancies carry higher risks. Some patients choose selective reduction to improve outcomes. No, Zora responded immediately, instinctively placing her hand over her still flat stomach. No reduction. I'll carry all 3. Driving home from the appointment, Zora pulled over when emotions overwhelmed her. 3 heartbeats, 3 children. After losing 1 baby in such tragic circumstances, the universe was giving her 3. Tears streamed down her face as she called Teresa. I'm having triplets, she said, when Teresa answered, her voice breaking with joy and disbelief. Triplets, Teresa exclaimed. Oh, Zora, the universe is compensating you, child. The thought had crossed Zora's mind as well. What Jamal had taken from her was being returned 3-fold. As her pregnancy progressed, Zora refused to slow down. ZW Ventures was taking shape around her growing belly, each milestone in the company's development paralleling her advancing pregnancy. By her 5th month, when her condition became impossible to conceal, she had assembled a team of 25 specialists and secured initial funding from investors impressed by her previous success. You should be on bed rest, Teresa scolded after finding Zora leading a 7-hour strategy session at 6 months pregnant. The doctors say everything is progressing normally, Zora countered, shifting uncomfortably in her chair. Carrying triplets was physically demanding, her petite frame struggling to accommodate 3 growing babies. Nevertheless, she continued working 14-hour days, now conducting meetings from a specially designed chair that supported her back. Her team watched with a mixture of awe and concern as their visibly pregnant CEO outlined complex technical strategies and negotiated with potential clients, never once using her condition as an excuse to lower her standards. In her 7th month, a complication arose. At a routine checkup, Dr. Patel noted elevated blood pressure and protein in Zora's urine, early signs of preeclampsia. I'm admitting you to the hospital, she said firmly. You need constant monitoring. For the first time since starting her fertility journey, Zora felt real fear. The memory of her previous loss surged forward, threatening to overwhelm her hard-won confidence. Will they be okay? She whispered, hands protectively cradling her enormous belly. We're going to do everything possible to ensure they are, Dr. Patel assured her. But you need to rest. Actual rest, not working from a hospital bed. That promise lasted approximately 12 hours. By the following morning, Zora had converted her hospital room into a command center, with Morgan shuttling documents, her laptop open beside her, and video conferences scheduled around the nurses' visits. "The Wilson contract needs to be finalized today," she instructed Morgan, while a nurse checked her blood pressure, frowning at the elevated reading. "And reschedule the board meeting to a conference call. Tell them I have a slight complication, but everything's under control." "Ms. Williams," the nurse interjected, "your blood pressure rises every time you take a work call. Dr. Patel was very clear about minimizing stress." Zora sighed, recognizing the impasse. Her babies needed her to rest, but ZW Ventures needed her leadership. For the first time in her life, she couldn't simply push through with determination and grit. "Morgan," she said finally, "call Teresa. Ask her to come in. We need to implement the contingency plan." The contingency plan, which Zora had developed but hoped never to use, temporarily elevated her 3 department heads to an executive committee with Teresa as advisor. For the remaining weeks of her pregnancy, Zora would focus solely on her health and the babies. It was the hardest decision she'd ever made, surrendering control of her fledgling company at such a crucial stage. But as she felt the movements of 3 little lives inside her, she recognized that some things were more important than business success. 2 weeks later, at 34 weeks gestation, Zora went into labor. The delivery room was a flurry of activity: doctors, nurses, equipment for 3 premature newborns. Despite the planned C-section, Zora insisted on remaining alert. "No additional sedation," she told the anesthesiologist. "I want to be present for every moment." Maya came first, a tiny bundle with a surprisingly strong cry. Elijah followed 1 minute later, smaller than his sister but equally vocal. Zach arrived last, silent at first, causing a moment of heart-stopping fear before a lusty wail indicated his fighting spirit. As the nurses placed the swaddled infants near Zora's head, allowing her to see them while the surgeons completed their work, she felt a sense of completion she'd never experienced before. These 3 perfect beings were hers, created from her determination, carried through adversity, born into a world where they would want for nothing. "Hello, my loves," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We've been waiting for you." In the recovery room, as Zora drifted in and out of consciousness, a nurse took a photo that would later become famous in business circles. Zora in the hospital bed, 3 tiny babies in her arms, laptop open beside her as she conducted a $5 million deal via video conference, her voice never wavering despite her recent major surgery. Looking at the 3 perfect faces of her children, Zora silently promised that they would never know rejection or abandonment, but she couldn't predict that 10 years later, the man who had abandoned her pregnant would be face to face with the family she had built alone. Looking at her children's perfect faces, Zora made a silent promise they would never know the pain of rejection she had experienced. The 3 tiny beings in the NICU incubators, connected to monitors with gentle beeping sounds, represented everything she had fought for, a future entirely on her terms. The doctors kept the triplets in the hospital for 3 weeks, standard procedure for babies born at 34 weeks. Zora refused to leave, converting a private room into a temporary office. Against medical advice, she was back on video calls within 48 hours of her C-section, wincing through the pain as she approved critical decisions for ZW Ventures. "You're pushing too hard," Teresa scolded, watching Zora attempt to stand unassisted 5 days post-surgery. "I've built this life for them," Zora replied, nodding toward the NICU. "Every minute I spend building the company is an investment in their future." By the time Maya, Elijah, and Zach were cleared to go home, Zora had secured a spacious 3-bedroom apartment in Chelsea with a dedicated nursery. She had hired Claudia, an experienced night nurse with impeccable references, to help manage the overwhelming logistics of caring for 3 newborns while running a company. "Will you be returning to the office full-time, Ms. Williams?" Morgan asked during their first meeting after the births. Zora considered the question while holding Zach, the smallest of the triplets. "No. We'll convert the 3rd bedroom into a home office. I'll work from here 3 days a week and go into the office for 2. This unconventional arrangement raised eyebrows among traditional investors, but Zora remained unmoved by their concerns. She had learned through bitter experience that conforming to others' expectations came at too high a price. The early months passed in a sleepless blur. Zora would feed one baby while on conference calls, review contracts during rare quiet moments, and sometimes conduct meetings with a sleeping infant strapped to her chest. The physical toll was immense, her body still recovering from major surgery while adapting to the demands of motherhood, but she refused to separate her professional and maternal identities. Most CEOs wouldn't bring a baby to an executive meeting, commented one board member when Zora arrived with Maya cradled in a sling. Most CEOs haven't given birth to triplets while launching a company, she replied evenly. We can either acknowledge that women executives have children, or we can continue pretending work happens in a vacuum separate from life. The comment, reported in a business blog covering women in technology, sparked a minor sensation. Overnight, Zora became a symbol for working mothers in leadership positions. Invitations for speaking engagements flooded in, most of which she declined, focusing instead on the 2 priorities that consumed her children and her company. By the triplets' first birthday, ZW Ventures had expanded to occupy 3 floors in the Flatiron building. The company's innovative approach to artificial intelligence for e-commerce had attracted significant attention, with their predictive algorithms showing unprecedented accuracy in forecasting consumer behavior across diverse markets. The birthday celebration was a modest affair in Zora's apartment, attended by Teresa, Claudia, and a few close colleagues. As Maya smashed her cake with gleeful abandon, Elijah methodically dissected his portion, and Zach created an artistic mess. Zora watched with a sense of wonder that these 3 distinct personalities had grown from the tiny, fragile beings in the NICU. "You've done good, child," Teresa said, squeezing Zora's shoulder, "both with these little ones and with the company." Zora smiled, the expression transforming her usually serious face. "They make everything worth it." When the triplets turned 2, Zora moved the family to a larger apartment in the Upper East Side. The new home reflected her growing success, spacious and elegant, with a designated playroom and expanded home office. Yet despite her increasing wealth, Zora maintained a relatively modest lifestyle compared to her peers at similar financial levels. "You could buy that penthouse you were looking at," Teresa pointed out as they unpacked boxes in the new apartment. "You can certainly afford it." "I'm saving for what matters," Zora replied, sorting through children's books. "The best schools, travel experiences, a secure future. I don't need a penthouse to prove I've succeeded." What remained unspoken was how her choices were shaped by Jamal's influence, both his abandonment and his materialistic values serving as a blueprint for what she wanted to avoid. As the children grew, Zora established clear routines that balanced her work responsibilities with dedicated family time. Mornings were reserved exclusively for the triplets, breakfast together, reading stories, and preparing for their day at the progressive preschool she had carefully selected. She adjusted her executive schedule to ensure she was home for dinner and bedtime rituals, often returning to work after the children were asleep. On Maya's 5th birthday, Zora sat cross-legged on the floor of her home office, showing her daughter the basics of a child-friendly coding program on a tablet. "Look, Mommy, I made the bunny jump," Maya exclaimed, her eyes bright with accomplishment. "That's excellent problem-solving," Zora praised, feeling a surge of pride. She repeated similar sessions with Elijah and Zach, noting how each approached challenges differently. Maya with bold confidence, Elijah with methodical precision, and Zach with creative innovation. The cover of Fortune magazine that month featured Zora standing against the Manhattan skyline, arms crossed, expression determined. The headline read, "ZW Ventures, How Zora Williams Revolutionized the Prediction of Consumer Behavior." The article detailed her company's meteoric rise to a valuation of $500 million, but mentioned nothing of her personal history. Zora had become adept at keeping those details private, redirecting interviews toward her technology rather than her past. That evening, after reading the article, Teresa found Zora on her apartment balcony, gazing at the city lights. "You never told them about Jamal," Teresa observed. "My success isn't defined by his rejection," Zora replied, sipping her tea. "And my children don't need to carry that story." The conversation shifted when Elijah appeared at the doorway, clutching a book about planets, eager for his mother's attention. As the triplets approached their 7th birthday, Zora finally agreed to purchase the penthouse she had long resisted. A stunning space overlooking Central Park with ample room for 3 growing children and Teresa, who now lived with them as a beloved grandmother figure. The move coincided with ZW Ventures crossing the billion-dollar valuation threshold following a revolutionary breakthrough in their predictive algorithms. "Mommy, is this whole place ours?" Zach asked, running through the expansive living room, his siblings close behind. "It is," Zora confirmed, watching them explore with delight. "This is our home." That night, after the children were asleep, Zora sat in her new office, reviewing a confidential report her assistant had prepared. It detailed the steady decline of Williams Petroleum under Jamal's leadership, the company struggling to adapt to changing energy markets, its stock price falling as renewable energy gained momentum. The report also noted Jamal's 3rd divorce, this time from a French heiress, with tabloids speculating about financial settlements and infidelity. Zora closed the file without emotion. She maintained these discreet monitoring reports not from vindictiveness, but as strategic intelligence. Knowing Jamal's trajectory helped her understand the business landscape and, admittedly, provided a certain validation of her own choices. The question she had been dreading eventually came when the triplets were 8. During a family dinner, Maya looked up from her plate with curious eyes. "Emily at school says everyone has a dad. Where's our dad?" The room fell silent. Zora had prepared for this moment, consulting child psychologists about age-appropriate responses. "Families come in many different forms," she explained gently. "Some have a mom and dad, some have 2 moms or 2 dads, and some, like ours, have 1 parent. I chose to have you because I wanted to be your mother very much." "But how did we get made without a dad?" Elijah asked, his scientific mind seeking logical explanations. Zora explained in simple terms about donor conception and her choice to become a mother on her own terms. The children accepted the explanation with the uncomplicated acceptance of young minds, more interested in whether they could have ice cream for dessert than the complexities of their origin. As ZW Ventures continued its expansion, Zora maintained her commitment to diverse hiring practices, creating family-friendly policies that attracted talented professionals who had been marginalized by traditional corporate structures. The company's headquarters became known for its on-site childcare center, flexible scheduling options, and emphasis on work-life integration rather than the elusive balance that so many found impossible to achieve. "You've created something revolutionary," commented a business reporter during a rare interview Zora granted for a special issue on workplace innovation. "Not just technologically, but culturally." "I built the company I needed when I was starting out," Zora replied simply. "One that recognizes talent regardless of packaging and understands that employees are whole humans with lives beyond their desks." The global pandemic that swept across the world when the triplets were 9 presented both challenges and opportunities. While many businesses floundered in the economic uncertainty, ZW Ventures' predictive algorithms proved remarkably accurate in forecasting the dramatic shifts in consumer behavior. Working from her penthouse, now converted partially into a command center, Zora led marathon strategy sessions while the children attended virtual school in the next room. When Claudia contracted the virus, Zora juggled homeschooling, caregiving, and steering her company through economic turbulence without missing a beat. "Our AI predicted the surge in home fitness equipment 3 weeks before it happened," she explained during an emergency board meeting conducted via video conference, Zach's artwork visible on the wall behind her. We've already redirected our clients' inventory strategies to capitalize on this trend. The success of ZW Ventures during the pandemic catapulted the company's valuation beyond $2 billion. While other businesses shuttered, Zora's foresight had positioned her company not just to survive, but to thrive in the changed landscape. On the Triplets' 10th birthday, Zora surveyed her life with quiet satisfaction. Her children were thriving, Maya already showing leadership qualities that teachers remarked upon, Elijah winning the state science competition with a project on sustainable energy, and Zach selling his first painting at a school charity auction for a surprising sum. That evening, as the children blew out candles on 3 separate cakes, a tradition Zora had established to honor their individuality, her phone pinged with a notification. Opening it discreetly, she found an invitation that made her breath catch momentarily. The National Economic Forum had selected her as their keynote speaker for the annual gala at the Waldorf Astoria, the first Black woman to receive such an honor. The irony wasn't lost on her. 15 years ago, Jamal had told her she would never belong in those elite circles. Now she would be the central voice defining the future of American business, addressing the very power brokers who had once been his peers. Observing the empire she had built and the 3 brilliant children she was raising alone, Zora didn't know that in just 3 months she would receive an invitation that would change everything, to be the first Black woman to speak as the keynote presenter at the National Economic Forum, where fate planned a 15-year delayed reunion. The invitation to speak at the National Economic Forum rested on Zora's desk as she gazed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office at ZW Ventures. Manhattan spread before her like a kingdom, the afternoon sun glinting off skyscrapers that housed corporations she now competed with, or outperformed. She ran her fingertips over the embossed lettering of the invitation, the irony not lost on her. 15 years ago, Jamal had told her women like her didn't belong in these circles. Now she would be defining the conversation. "Ms. Williams?" Morgan's voice interrupted her thoughts as her assistant entered with a tablet in hand. "The executives from Google are waiting in the conference room." Zora nodded, adjusting the sleeves of her custom Armani suit. At 38, she had perfected the art of commanding presence, shoulders back, chin lifted, eyes direct. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. I want to review the latest analytics first." Morgan hesitated, her gaze falling to the tablet where the complete guest list for the forum had just been updated. "There's something else you might want to see before the meeting." "What is it?" Zora asked, checking the latest revenue figures on her own tablet. Morgan bit her lip, weighing her words carefully. The final attendee list for the Economic Forum came through. "I noticed, well, Jamal Williams is on it, CEO of Williams Petroleum." Zora's fingers paused over the screen momentarily, the only indication that the name had any effect on her. She had trained herself over the years to control her physical responses to emotional triggers, a skill that had served her well in countless negotiations. "Interesting," she said, her voice neutral. "Williams Petroleum must be struggling to maintain relevance if they're attending economic forums rather than oil conventions." Morgan studied her boss's face, searching for signs of distress. Finding none, she nodded. "Should I mention this to Teresa?" "That won't be necessary," Zora replied, gathering her materials for the Google meeting. "It's been 15 years. Jamal Williams is merely another CEO in a room full of them." But after Morgan left, Zora allowed herself a private moment of reflection. Jamal at the same event. A collision of past and present she hadn't anticipated. Would he recognize her? Would he remember what he'd done? The thought brought neither anxiety nor anticipation, just a cool assessment of an unexpected variable in an otherwise meticulously planned event. At home that evening, the triplets burst into Zora's office, excited about their latest achievements. Maya proudly displayed a certificate from her robotics competition. Elijah explained his new scientific experiment involving plant photosynthesis optimization, and Zach showed off a digital art piece he'd created that had impressed his teacher. The robotics team won first place in the state finals, Elijah announced, holding up the gold medal they'd received. Zora's face softened into the smile she reserved only for her children. That's incredible. Tell me everything about the competition. As the triplets eagerly recounted their victory, competing to add details, Zora felt the familiar surge of fierce pride. These brilliant, confident children were her true legacy, not the billions in her bank account or the technology that bore her name. "We're having celebratory ice cream," declared Maya with the authority of an eldest child, though only by minutes. "Absolutely," Zora agreed, checking her watch. "And then homework before bed. I have an important speech to prepare for." "The big fancy hotel one?" asked Zach, always attentive to details others missed. "Yes, the Economic Forum at the Waldorf Astoria," Zora confirmed. "You three will be coming with me, remember? We've already picked out your formal attire." "Will there be other kids?" Elijah asked practically. "A few," Zora replied. "Children of other executives. But more importantly, you'll see your mother making history as the first black woman to deliver the keynote address." Later, after the children had gone to bed, Zora sat in her home office reviewing her speech titled "Innovation and Inclusion: The Future of American Technology." Teresa brought her a cup of chamomile tea, settling into the chair opposite her desk. "Morgan seemed concerned when she called me earlier," Teresa said casually. "Something about the forum guest list?" Zora looked up, unsurprised that Morgan had contacted Teresa despite instructions to the contrary. "Jamal will be attending." Teresa's eyebrows rose. "Ah, how do you feel about that?" "I don't," Zora replied, taking a sip of tea. "He's irrelevant to my life now." Teresa studied her former protege, now a formidable business leader and mother. "You've come so far that it's easy to forget what you endured. Seeing him might bring back memories you've sealed away." "I've never sealed them away," Zora corrected her. "I've integrated them. Everything I am, everything I've built, exists partially because of what he did. I wouldn't have my children, this company, this life if he hadn't shown me exactly who he was 15 years ago." Teresa nodded, acknowledging the truth in Zora's words. "Will you speak to him if he approaches you?" "With the same professional courtesy I'd extend to any other CEO," Zora replied, returning to her speech draft. "Nothing more, nothing less." The following morning, Zora led a full executive team meeting to finalize preparations for the product launch that would follow the Economic Forum. Her leadership style had evolved over the years, still demanding excellence, but now with a confidence that inspired rather than intimidated. Her team, diverse in background but unified in vision, had helped build ZW Ventures into a technology powerhouse that had fundamentally changed how businesses understood and responded to consumer behavior. "The pandemic proved our algorithms are light years ahead of competitors," summarized Amir, her chief technology officer. "We predicted consumer shifts that nobody else saw coming." "Which is precisely why I want to emphasize ethical implementation in my keynote," Zora noted. "With great predictive power comes great responsibility. We need to lead the conversation on using these tools to benefit society, not just corporate profits." After the meeting, Morgan approached with final details for the forum. "Your stylist has confirmed the Versace gown for the event, and Claudia has arranged for the children's formal wear fittings tomorrow. Also, Teresa asked me to reserve additional security for the evening." Zora raised an eyebrow. "Additional security? Did she give a reason?" "She mentioned it was standard procedure for high-profile events," Morgan replied, though her tone suggested there might be more to it. Understanding dawned on Zora. Teresa was concerned about the Jamal situation, worried perhaps that the encounter might be more volatile than Zora anticipated. It was unnecessary but touching in its protectiveness. "Confirm the security but keep it discreet," Zora instructed. "The children shouldn't feel like they're attending with a presidential detail." The day before the forum, Zora took rare personal time to meditate at sunrise, a practice she had adopted during her second year as a CEO when the stress had threatened to overwhelm her. Seated on her penthouse balcony overlooking Central Park, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From that freezing night at Penn Station to this moment, preparing to address the most powerful business leaders in America, the path had been neither straight nor easy. There had been countless setbacks, moments of doubt, and sacrifices made. Yet through it all, she had maintained her vision of creating something meaningful, something that couldn't be taken away. Her phone buzzed with a text from Morgan. Final guest list attached. Williams Petroleum down to 3 attendees from 5. JW still confirmed. Zora put the phone down without responding. The fact that Williams Petroleum had reduced their presence suggested financial constraints, another indication of the company's declining fortunes. A small, deeply buried part of her felt a flicker of satisfaction at the symmetry of it all. As ZW Ventures rose, Williams Petroleum fell, not by her design, but by the natural consequences of innovation versus stagnation. That evening, Zora gathered the triplets for a briefing on the upcoming event. At 10 years old, they were remarkably poised for their age, accustomed to accompanying their mother to select high-profile functions. "Tomorrow night is very important," she explained as they sat in the living room. "There will be senators, governors, and CEOs of major companies. I'll be giving the main speech." "What should we say if people ask about our father?" Maya questioned directly, always the one to address potential complications head-on. Zora had prepared for this. "The truth, that I chose to have you through a medical procedure because I wanted to be a mother. That's all anyone needs to know." "Is it because he was a bad person?" Elijah asked, his analytical mind connecting dots Zora hadn't explicitly drawn. She considered her answer carefully. "Not everyone is meant to be a parent. I made the choice that was right for me and for you. That's the important part of our story." On the morning of the forum, Zora awoke before her alarm, a rare nervous energy coursing through her. Not because of Jamal, she had meant what she said to Teresa about his irrelevance, but because tonight represented a culmination of everything she had worked toward. Being selected as keynote speaker placed her among the most influential business leaders in the country. It was validation not just of her company's success but of her vision for technology's future. She dressed in a simple outfit for the day's preparations, saving the Versace gown for the evening. Her stylist arrived mid-morning, followed by a team that would handle hair and makeup. The children were excited, treating the day like an elaborate dress-up game, unaware of the potential emotional complexity awaiting their mother. "Ms. Williams, your security team has arrived for the briefing," Morgan announced shortly after lunch. And Mr. Chen from the forum called to confirm they've arranged the special introduction by the governor. As the day progressed, Zora mentally rehearsed her speech while supervising the children's preparations. Teresa hovered nearby, her concern evident despite attempts to appear casual. "I've arranged for a separate car to follow yours," Teresa mentioned as stylists worked on Zora's hair, "just in case you need to leave earlier or later than planned." Zora met her mentor's eyes in the mirror. "You're worried about something that's not going to happen. Jamal Williams is a footnote in my life, not a chapter." "Maybe," Teresa conceded, "but I've known you long enough to remember when that wasn't true. Just because you've processed your past doesn't mean encountering it in the flesh won't affect you." Zora didn't argue further, recognizing Teresa's concern came from love. Perhaps she was right to be cautious. 15 years was a long time, but emotional wounds could leave scars that ached when the weather changed, and tonight's forecast called for a storm of memories. As evening approached, Zora stood before her full-length mirror, assessing the final result of hours of preparation. The black Versace gown, designed exclusively for her, embodied everything she had become: elegant, powerful, unapologetic. Her hair was styled in a sophisticated updo that complemented her natural texture, and the diamond necklace at her throat caught the light with every breath. "Mommy, you look like a queen," Maya gasped, entering the room in her own age-appropriate formal dress. Elijah and Zach, handsome in their tailored suits, nodded in agreement. Claudia had ensured they were impeccably presented, down to the tiny cufflinks that matched their mother's jewelry. "We're ready to depart, Ms. Williams," announced her chief of security from the doorway. "The perimeter team is already at the Waldorf, and your limousine is waiting." Zora gathered her children, each representing a different facet of her triumph over adversity. "Let's go make history tonight." As the Rolls-Royce limousine with the discreet ZW Ventures logo glided through Manhattan's streets, Zora couldn't know that between the 100 CEOs invited to the exclusive event was a name she hadn't heard spoken in 15 years. Jamal Williams, now CEO of Williams Petroleum, a company fighting to remain relevant in the age of renewable energy. She also didn't know that fate had planned a reunion that would shake the foundations of the American corporate world. The Waldorf Astoria glowed with golden light, its historic facade illuminated against the Manhattan night sky. Limousines and luxury cars formed an elegant procession along the entrance, depositing the nation's most powerful business leaders onto the red carpet that led into the Grand Hotel. Photographers jostled behind velvet ropes, capturing images of America's corporate elite in their finery. When the white Rolls-Royce bearing the discreet ZW Ventures logo pulled up to the entrance, a noticeable hush fell over the crowd. The chauffeur opened the door with practiced precision, and Zora Williams emerged, a vision in her custom Versace gown. The photographers, recognizing the rare opportunity to capture the notoriously private CEO, erupted in a frenzy of flashing lights. "Ms. Williams, over here! Zora, look this way!" She acknowledged them with a composed smile before turning to help her children from the car. The triplets emerged with remarkable poise for 10-year-olds, flanking their mother with practiced ease. Their appearance together, the successful CEO and her 3 identical children, created an immediate sensation. "Ms. Williams, welcome!" The director of the Economic Forum hurried down the steps to greet her personally, bypassing several other arriving executives. "We're honored to have you as our keynote speaker this year." "Thank you for the invitation," Zora replied, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had become her trademark. "I'm looking forward to the discussions tonight." As she entered the opulent lobby, Zora felt rather than saw the attention directed her way. Fellow executives nodded respectfully. Politicians smiled eagerly, hoping for an introduction. It was a far cry from how she had been treated in corporate settings early in her career. Dismissed, overlooked, relegated to getting coffee while men with half her intelligence commanded the room. Maya tugged gently at her mother's hand. "Everyone's looking at you," she whispered. "They're looking at all of us," Zora corrected with a smile. "Be yourselves. You belong here as much as anyone." Inside the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over elaborately decorated tables. Place cards indicated the carefully orchestrated seating arrangements, with Zora and her children assigned to the central table alongside the governor, 2 senators, and the CEO of America's largest bank. On the opposite side of the vast room, Jamal Williams entered alone, adjusting his bow tie with fingers that betrayed a slight tremor. At 43, he still cut an attractive figure, though the past 15 years had left their mark. Lines around his eyes that spoke of stress rather than laughter, a certain tightness around his mouth that suggested discontent. His tuxedo, while expensive, hung slightly loose on his frame, as if he had recently lost weight. "Usual scotch, Mr. Williams?" asked a passing server who recognized him from previous events. "Double," Jamal replied, taking the glass and scanning the room with the anxious energy of a man whose social standing had become precarious. Thomas Harrington, CEO of a mid-sized tech company, approached him with a collegial clap on the shoulder. "Jamal, didn't expect to see Williams Petroleum represented tonight. Thought you'd be at the Houston Energy Conference." Jamal forced a smile. "Diversifying our connections. Oil isn't the only game anymore." "Tell me about it," Thomas laughed. These tech companies are eating everyone's lunch. Speaking of which, have you seen tonight's keynote speaker? Zora Williams from ZW Ventures. Woman's a genius with predictive algorithms. Her company saved half the retailers in America during the pandemic. Jamal's glass paused halfway to his lips. Zora Williams? Yes, over there. Thomas gestured toward the center of the room. The stunning woman in black Versace with those 3 identical kids. Word is she's worth north of $2 billion now. Self-made, too. Came from nothing. Built an empire in artificial intelligence. Jamal turned slowly, his eyes finding the figure Thomas indicated. The glass nearly slipped from his suddenly numb fingers. It was impossible, and yet unmistakable. The woman commanding attention across the ballroom, elegant, poised, radiating quiet power, was Zora. The same woman he had discarded like unwanted baggage 15 years ago. The woman he had told would never amount to anything without him. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked, noticing Jamal's pallor. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," Jamal muttered, downing his scotch in one burning gulp. "Excuse me." Across the room, Zora guided her children through introductions with practiced ease, teaching them through example the subtle art of high-level networking. She hadn't spotted Jamal yet, her attention focused on ensuring the triplets felt comfortable in the unfamiliar environment. "Mrs. Williams, these must be your famous children," Senator Richardson said warmly. "I've heard they're as brilliant as their mother." "They're their own people," Zora replied with a proud smile. "Maya has a gift for leadership, Elijah for science, and Zach for artistic expression." "A pleasure to meet you all," the senator said, clearly impressed by the children's poised handshakes and direct eye contact, skills Zora had deliberately cultivated in them. As they moved through the pre-dinner reception, Zora felt a strange shift in the energy of the room, a ripple of whispers, a subtle realignment of attention. Looking up, she found herself staring directly into the eyes of Jamal Williams from across the crowded space. The moment stretched between them, 15 years collapsing into an instant of recognition. His face registered shock, confusion, and something that might have been shame. Zora's expression remained perfectly composed, betraying nothing of the complex emotions that surged beneath her calm exterior. She simply held his gaze for 3 heartbeats, then deliberately turned away to continue her conversation with the bank CEO, dismissing Jamal as effectively as if he were a stranger of no consequence. The pointed non-acknowledgement left Jamal standing frozen, the empty Scotch glass clutched in his hand. He had prepared himself for many scenarios tonight, potential investors questioning Williams Petroleum's outdated business model, rivals celebrating his company's declining stock, but not this. Never this. During the hour that followed, Jamal watched Zora from a distance, unable to reconcile the confident, accomplished woman before him with the desperate, pregnant girl he had abandoned. She moved through the room with effortless authority, engaged in meaningful conversations with power brokers who clearly valued her insights, while he found himself increasingly relegated to the periphery of discussions. The dinner bell finally rang, summoning guests to their assigned tables. Jamal glanced at his place card, table 14, near the back of the room. The seating arrangement told its own story about his diminished standing. As waiters served the elaborate first course, Jamal continued stealing glances at Zora. The 3 children beside her fascinated him. They appeared to be the same age, 10, perhaps 11, too young to be from their brief marriage. Had she remarried? Created a family with someone else? "Who are those children with her?" he asked his dinner companion, a venture capitalist he vaguely knew. "The triplets? Math prodigy, science genius, and budding artist, if you believe the profiles? She had them through IVF when she was already CEO of her first company. Raises them alone, bit of a legend in Silicon Valley for how she balances motherhood and empire building." Jamal quickly calculated 10 years, not 15. Relief and a surprising pang of disappointment mingled in his chest. Not his children, then. the baby she had been carrying when he left her. What had happened? The evening progressed through dinner toward the keynote address. Jamal found himself drinking more than usual, liquid courage for what he knew he must do. He needed to speak with her, to explain, to understand how the woman he had dismissed as worthless had transformed into this powerhouse while his own carefully cultivated advantages had yielded diminishing returns. When the dinner plates were cleared and the forum director approached the podium to introduce the keynote speaker, Jamal straightened in his chair, his attention fixed entirely on the stage. "It is my distinct honor to introduce tonight's keynote speaker," the director began, "a visionary whose groundbreaking work in artificial intelligence has redefined how businesses understand consumer behavior. From founding her first tech startup to building ZW Ventures into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, she has demonstrated that true innovation comes from diverse perspectives. Please welcome to the stage Ms. Zora Williams." The applause was enthusiastic, genuine respect evident in the standing ovation that greeted Zora as she ascended to the podium. Under the spotlights, she was magnificent, poised, powerful, radiating an inner confidence that commanded attention. "Thank you," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Tonight, I want to talk about the future of American innovation, not just what technologies will shape our tomorrow, but who will create them and why that matters to everyone in this room." For the next 30 minutes, Zora delivered a masterful address on technology, inclusion, and the competitive advantage of diverse leadership. She spoke without notes, weaving complex technical concepts with accessible examples and compelling vision. The audience was rapt, including Jamal, who couldn't tear his eyes away from the woman whose potential he had so catastrophically underestimated. And that is how a girl from Detroit, daughter of public school teachers, transformed rejection into motivation to build a billion-dollar company, she concluded, triggering a standing ovation that seemed to shake the chandeliers. During the formal dinner that followed, Jamal observed Zora from afar, seated at the head table between the governor and senators, laughing and discussing policy like a veteran Washington insider. His own table, at the periphery of the grand ballroom, perfectly symbolized his fall in the corporate world. Williams Petroleum no longer commanded the respect it once had, and his series of divorces had consumed much of his personal fortune. After several more drinks, Jamal gathered his courage and approached the VIP table during dessert. He waited for a momentary lull in conversation before stepping forward. "Zora, could we speak privately for a moment?" he asked, struggling to maintain his composure under the curious gazes of the powerful figures surrounding her. She regarded him coolly for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. 2 minutes. Excusing herself graciously, Zora followed Jamal to a more secluded corner of the ballroom. In the relative privacy, he attempted his most charming smile, the same one he had used to win her heart 15 years earlier. "You look absolutely stunning," he began. "Your success, it's impressive." "What do you want, Jamal?" she asked directly, cutting through his attempt at charm. "Just to reconnect. Maybe grab coffee sometime, talk business." He hesitated. "I always knew you had potential." Zora's laugh was genuine, though without humor. "Always knew? You told me, and I'm quoting, 'Women like you never amount to anything, much less without a man like me.'" Jamal blanched, the exact words he had spoken returning to haunt him. "I was confused back then, with the pressure from my father." "Pressure?" Zora interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "Let me tell you what pressure is, Jamal. Pressure is sleeping in train stations while pregnant. Pressure is losing a baby because you're working 2 jobs to afford rent. Pressure is building a company from nothing when everyone says you'll fail." The revelation hit Jamal like a physical blow. "You lost the baby?" "Yes. A complication in the 6th month. I was alone in the hospital, with no one to hold my hand." She held his gaze unflinchingly. "You wonder if my children are yours? No, they're not. They're from IVF I did when I was already CEO of my first company." I chose to become a mother on my own terms, when I could give them everything they deserved. Jamal felt the weight of his past choices as never before. Zora, I'm sorry. I was young, immature. No, she interrupted again. You are exactly who you are now, a man who makes decisions based on appearances and status, not character. The difference is that now I see that clearly. The murmurs in the ballroom increased as people began to notice their intense conversation. Several executives drew closer, catching fragments of their exchange. Your empire is falling, Jamal, while mine continues to grow, she continued. Not because I'm smarter, but because I learned that true leadership comes from solid values, not inherited privilege. Can we keep this private? He asked nervously, aware of the watching eyes. Maybe we can resolve our past more discreetly. Private? Zora's smile was glacial. Like when you humiliated me in our own home, like when you left me with nothing, pregnant in the middle of winter. Her words echoed louder than she had intended. Several nearby guests paused their conversations, turning toward the unfolding scene. You are the man who abandoned Zora Williams? Asked a shocked tech CEO who was standing nearby. The Zora Williams? The buzz spread through the ballroom like wildfire in dry brush. Jamal began, but words failed him. Yes, he is, Zora answered calmly. The man who told me black women don't belong in certain circles. Ironic to find him in the less prestigious section of this event, while I occupy the place he always dreamed of. The silence deepened as she continued, now with all eyes in the salon upon them. Ladies and gentlemen, witness the power of underestimation. When ZW Ventures acquires the technology division of Williams Petroleum next month, yes, the negotiations are underway with his board, we will complete the perfect circle of poetic justice. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute. Zora's words hung in the air like a verdict, and in many ways they were exactly that. The assembled power brokers of American business stood frozen, processing what they had just witnessed. Zora Williams, the keynote speaker and celebrated CEO, had just revealed that Jamal Williams, once a titan of industry, had abandoned her pregnant and destitute 15 years ago, and now, in the ultimate reversal of fortune, her company was acquiring his. The moment stretched, uncomfortable and electric, until the governor of New York cleared his throat. I believe dinner is concluding, he announced, attempting to restore normality to the suddenly charged atmosphere. Perhaps we should move to the reception area for coffee. The spell broken, conversations erupted throughout the ballroom. Executives clustered in small groups, their voices hushed but animated, eyes darting between Zora and Jamal. The story spread with the efficiency of breaking news, embellished with each retelling. Jamal stood rooted to the spot, his face a mask of humiliation. The scotch he had consumed throughout the evening churned in his stomach as the full impact of what had just happened washed over him. His carefully constructed facade, already crumbling in business circles, had just been completely dismantled in front of the very people whose respect he desperately needed. Is it true? Asked a board member from a major investment bank, approaching him with barely concealed disgust. You abandoned a pregnant woman in winter? Jamal opened his mouth, but no words emerged. What could he possibly say? That it was complicated? That he had been young? That his father had pressured him? Every excuse sounded hollow, even in his own mind. Across the room, Zora maintained her composure, returning to her children at the head table. She bent to speak quietly to them, her face serene despite the storm she had just unleashed. Is everything okay, Mommy? Maya asked, sensing the change in the room's atmosphere. Everything is fine, Zora assured them, her voice steady. Sometimes adults have complicated histories. Let's enjoy the rest of our evening. Teresa appeared at her side, having witnessed the entire exchange from nearby. That wasn't exactly how I expected this evening to unfold, she murmured, subtly positioning herself between Zora and the rest of the room, protective as always. Neither did I, Zora admitted quietly. But some truths need to be spoken aloud. As the formal dinner concluded, guests moved to an adjoining salon for the networking portion of the evening. Jamal found himself increasingly isolated, conversations dying as he approached groups, colleagues finding urgent reasons to be elsewhere. Even those who had been friendly earlier now maintained a polite distance, unwilling to associate themselves with the evening's villain. A young reporter from the Wall Street Journal who had been covering the forum approached Zora cautiously. "Ms. Williams, David Chen from the Journal. Would you care to comment on what just transpired between you and Mr. Williams?" Zora considered him for a moment. "The past is exactly that, the past. My focus remains on the future of technology and creating opportunities for overlooked talent. But is it true that Williams Petroleum's technology division is being acquired by ZW Ventures?" "I don't comment on deals until they're finalized," she replied smoothly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, it's getting late for my children." As Zora prepared to leave with the triplets, a steady stream of business leaders approached to express their admiration, many offering business cards and invitations to private meetings. The governor himself escorted her to the exit, speaking animatedly about a technology initiative he hoped she would advise on. From across the room, Jamal watched this procession with a mixture of bitterness and dawning comprehension. The world he had known, where men like him were automatically granted deference and respect, was changing. And Zora, whom he had once deemed unworthy, was now at the vanguard of that change. Making a desperate decision, he intercepted her near the grand staircase as she was saying her goodbyes. "Zora, please," he said, his voice low and urgent. 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes somewhere private." She regarded him coolly, then nodded to Teresa. "Take the children to the car. I'll be right there." In a small antechamber off the main lobby, Jamal paced nervously while Zora stood perfectly still, the embodiment of controlled power. "You've destroyed me," he began, accusation edging his tone. "Do you know what this will do to my reputation? To the company?" "Your reputation?" Zora repeated, her eyebrow rising slightly. "Your company? Interesting that these are your concerns, not what you did to me." "I was wrong," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "What I did was inexcusable. But did you have to humiliate me publicly, in front of everyone who matters?" "I didn't plan to," Zora replied truthfully. "But when you asked to keep things private, as if my suffering should be hidden away while you maintain your facade, something snapped. Why should your dignity be protected when you showed none for mine?" Jamal's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him. "What happens now?" "Now?" Zora's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Now you experience what I experienced, rebuilding from scratch. The difference is, you still have resources and connections I never had. Your struggle will be nothing compared to what mine was." "And the acquisition? Was that true or just for effect?" "Oh, it's true," she confirmed. "Your board approached us 3 months ago. They've lost confidence in your leadership. The papers will be signed next week." The blow landed with devastating precision. His own board, working behind his back. The ultimate betrayal. "I'll fight it," he declared, a last flare of defiance. "With what leverage?" Zora asked simply. "Your company's stock has dropped 40% in 2 years. Your last 3 products failed to gain market traction. And after tonight," she shrugged elegantly, "your position is untenable." Outside the Waldorf, reporters had begun gathering, alerted by tweets from attendees about the dramatic confrontation. Camera flashes illuminated the night as Zora emerged, walking with measured steps to her waiting Rolls-Royce where Teresa and the children were already seated. "Ms. Williams, can you comment on your history with Jamal Williams? Is it true he abandoned you when you were pregnant? Are you acquiring Williams Petroleum?" Zora paused at the car door, considering the sea of microphones. With the poise that had become her trademark, she turned to address them. 15 years ago, I was told I would never amount to anything. tonight serves as a reminder that we should be careful about the limitations we place on others and on ourselves. Now, if you'll excuse me, my children have school tomorrow." The following morning's headlines were merciless. From abandoned to billionaire, the extraordinary story of Zora Williams. Oil heirs' cruel past exposed at Economic Forum. Tech visionary reveals shocking history with petroleum CEO. The Wall Street Journal ran a front-page article detailing not only the confrontation, but also piecing together Zora's remarkable journey from homelessness to billionaire status. Business Insider published a scathing analysis of Williams Petroleum's decline under Jamal's leadership, contrasting it with ZW Ventures' meteoric rise. In her penthouse apartment, Zora maintained her normal routine with the children, helping them prepare breakfast before school as if the previous night had been any other business function. "Mom, is that you on Dad's tablet?" Elijah asked, peering over at the device where Teresa was reading the morning news. Zora exchanged a glance with Teresa, who quickly put the tablet away. "Yes, I gave a speech last night that's getting some attention." "Who was that man you were talking to?" Maya asked directly, her perceptive nature missing nothing. "The one who looked upset." Zora took a deep breath. This moment had arrived sooner than she'd anticipated, but she had always promised herself she would answer her children's questions honestly in age-appropriate ways. "That man was my husband a long time ago, before you were born." 3 identical pairs of eyes widened in surprise. "You were married?" Zach asked, incredulous at this revelation about his mother's past. "Briefly, yes," Zora confirmed, spreading jam on a piece of toast with steady hands. "We weren't right for each other and went our separate ways." "Why haven't you ever mentioned him before?" Elijah questioned, always analytical. "Because he wasn't an important part of my story," she answered truthfully. "Some people are in our lives briefly, teaching us something before we move on." "He seemed sad when he was talking to you," Zach observed, his artistic sensitivity picking up on nuances the others might have missed. "Sometimes people feel sad when they realize the mistakes they've made," Zora explained gently. "But that's for them to work through, not for us to fix." After the children left for school with Claudia, Zora's phone rang continuously with interview requests from major networks and publications. She instructed Morgan to decline them all, preferring to let the story play out without further commentary from her. Meanwhile, across town in his rented apartment, Jamal Williams watched his life unravel in real time. His fiancée, a Palm Beach socialite who had been planning their summer wedding, called to return his ring after reading the morning's headlines. His phone lit up with notifications of text messages from board members requesting an emergency meeting at 11. He poured himself a drink, despite the early hour, and stared out at the city that had once been his playground. How had everything gone so wrong? From the golden boy of Texas oil to this, disgraced, exposed, and on the verge of professional exile. The board meeting was brief and brutal. Seated around the mahogany table where he had once commanded respect, Jamal faced the collective judgment of 10 stone-faced executives. "In light of recent events, the board has lost confidence in your leadership," the chairman stated without preamble. "We're accelerating the sale of the technology division to ZW Ventures and placing you on administrative leave while we determine next steps." "You can't do this," Jamal protested weakly. "My family built this company." "And you've nearly destroyed it," replied another board member bluntly. "Your personal conduct has become a liability we can no longer afford." Later that afternoon, as Jamal cleared his personal items from his office under the watchful eye of a security guard, he glanced up at the lobby television. There was Zora, ringing the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange, celebrating a new partnership between ZW Ventures and a Japanese renewable energy firm. The stock ticker showed ZW shares surging past the $3 billion market cap. A week later, a hand-delivered envelope arrived at Zora's office. Inside was a handwritten letter from Jamal, the paper expensive, the handwriting slightly unsteady. "Zora," it began, "words cannot express my regret for the pain I caused you. I've lost everything. My position, my reputation, My future prospects. I'm writing to ask if there might be a place for me at ZW Ventures. I have extensive industry contacts and experience that could be valuable to your expansion plans. Teresa, who was in Zora's office when she opened the letter, made a disgusted sound after reading over her shoulder. The audacity! He's asking you for a job? Zora folded the letter thoughtfully and slipped it back into its envelope. Forward this to Human Resources with my standard recommendation. Evaluate the candidate by the same criteria as any other. Even after everything? Teresa asked, surprised. Especially after everything, Zora replied with a serene smile. The greatest victory isn't destroying him, but treating him as I would treat anyone else, without privileges, without disadvantages, just on his own merit. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.